Is it on? Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Power and Privilege Symposium. If you didn't get the opportunity to hear my introduction this morning, my name's Anna Erickson, and I'm an English literature undergraduate here at UAS. Our afternoon keynote is titled La Vida Robot, STEM and Immigration. We are very excited to welcome Oscar Vasquez, subject of the book Spare Parts, veteran, immigrant from Mexico, and advocate for the STEM fields. Jonas Lamb, an associate professor of library science and public services librarian, is here to tell you a little bit more about Oscar. Please join me in welcoming Jonas to the stage.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me all right? All right. Well, what a morning of deep listening and meaningful conversations. I'm grateful to all the student organizers and the conference committee for making this space for these very necessary dialogues in our community, and to all the participants for sharing your perspectives and your experience. I was fortunate to align some of my energy fields this morning, thanks to the guidance of Mo Longworth. Thank you, Mo, for helping me align my chakra. And I got to see a terrific presentation by Richard Simpson's cultural geography students. And I feel privileged to work here on this campus every day. As Anna mentioned, my name is Jonas Lamb. I work in this library, this incredible house of culture, knowledge, and lived experience, written by a host of diverse authors and a wide array of critical perspectives. Since 2013, I've coordinated the One Campus, One Book program. One Campus, One Book is the common reading program here. This is our 8th year of celebrating literature and the relationships and communities that develop between readers, writers, and our stories. Discussing a common book can also provide a safe venue for beginning difficult dialogues and allows members of the UAS and the Juneau community to begin each academic year on the same page. This year's selection, Spare Parts, 4 undocumented teenagers, 1 ugly robot, and the battle for the American dream, shares the experience of 4 Latino teenagers from Phoenix who overcame great barriers to demonstrate the many ways in which their abilities defied the low expectations set for them and other immigrants living in the U.S. Our next speaker, Oscar Vasquez, was one of those teenagers, and though he is not the book's author, Spare Parts is his story. In 2002, as a junior in high school, Oscar was awarded the Junior ROTC Officer of the Year Award for his leadership, integrity, and perseverance. His work ethic was fueled in large part by a conversation the previous year with the ROTC group's instructor, Major Glenn Goins. In that critical conversation, Major Goins informed Oscar that only U.S. citizens and permanent residents were eligible to enlist in the military. This passage from Spare Parts describes the fierce determination that Oscar, like many new Americans, share. Oscar felt as if the air had been sucked out of him. He didn't know what to say. He looked at Goins for a moment, but then snapped to attention. This was just another obstacle, nothing more. And it was the mission of a cadet to overcome all obstacles. The bigger the obstacle, the better the opportunity to prove the cadet's mettle. As he walked away, he decided there was only one solution: to become the best cadet the program had ever seen. Maybe if I'm good enough, something will change, he thought. During his senior year in high school, Oscar and a ragtag robotics team pushed the limits of hard work and courage. They traveled at great risk across state lines to UC Santa Barbara with a robot they built from PVC pipe and a budget of $800, and entered the college division of a national underwater robotics competition, sponsored in part by the Office of Naval Research and NASA, and went head-to-head with MIT. The team's success at the competition, due in large part to Oscar's leadership, was just another obstacle to overcome, as was graduating from Arizona State University with honors, attaining U.S. citizenship, and serving in the U.S. Army in Afghanistan to fight for his country, despite often feeling unwanted here. In his book, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, Jose Antonio Vargas describes the ethical dilemma that he faced over the boilerplate citizenship question on a job application. He asks readers to consider, which box would you check? What have you done to earn your box? Beside being born at a certain place in a certain time, did you have to do anything? Anything at all? If you wanted to have a career, if you wanted to have a life, if you wanted to exist as a human being, what would you have done? Oscar has given invited talks at Johns Hopkins University, Washington State University, Northlake College, and was an honored guest at President Obama's 2016 State of the Union address. Spare Parts was made into a featured film released by Lionsgate in 2015. Harside Books is here with copies of Spare Parts for sale after Oscar's presentation. He'll be available to sign and answer your questions. So please join me in welcoming Oscar Vasquez.
Thank you. All right, can you all hear me? Is that on? Is it good now? All right, first things first. All right. Thank you all for having me here, for giving me the opportunity to come and share a little bit more of our story here, perhaps give you a different perspective. I don't know, a few months ago, I received an email from Jonas to see if I was interested in coming here and perhaps sharing our story with you. And, you know, I looked into the program, I saw all the different presentations from the past, and I don't really have a fancy presentation. I don't have a lot of polished things to talk about, right? All I have is our story, right? So I talked to Jonas a little bit and like, you know, what should I talk about, right? And pretty much what I'm going to do is just the story, right? That's all I have. And hopefully that will give you a little perspective on what our life has been like being an immigrant in this country. So I'll start from the good part, I guess. You can say that's the good part. So I essentially grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I went to a high school, the local high school there. And essentially the area of Phoenix where I lived was a pretty impoverished area. I really didn't know that it was a poor area of town because pretty much everyone around me was in the same boat, right? So to me, we're all the same. It didn't really hit me what it meant that 95% of the students that went to the school qualified for free school lunches, right? I didn't know what that meant. I just know I got a free lunch if I wanted it, right? And I thought that was pretty cool. I got free lunch, right? So the school in that area, right, it was pretty much over 90% Hispanic as well. And the school district, in an attempt to try and get a diversified student body, came up with something called magnet programs. I was lucky enough that the high school I went to had a magnet program in marine science and computer science. And I was really interested in marine science. Whenever they presented that program to us as a middle schooler, they told us that if you went into the marine science program at that high school, eventually you were going to get to go and see the ocean, right? So I had never seen that before. And I lived in Phoenix, right in the middle of the desert. And I thought that was really cool. So that was one of the first things that attracted me to that program. So I went in the marine science program. The high school also had an ROTC, or JROTC program, the Army version of it. And when I was in middle school, the ROTC cadets came over and did a presentation, and they were climbing ropes and doing push-ups and pull-ups and all kinds of cool stuff. I'm like, that's really cool. I want to do that too. So I signed up for marine science and ROTC, right? And I never realized how great opportunity that high school was providing us, providing those programs. And I went with it. I really wanted to go and join the Army after high school. I really wanted to go and learn about marine science and, you know, go to the ocean sometime. And that's what I went with, right? The whole 4 years of high school, I went into that program, into the marine science program, and I stayed with ROTC as well. Our senior year of high school in that marine science program, our teachers came in and asked us a question. right? They said, over the summer, we went to this program in Santa Barbara, and they taught us about ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, that go underwater and survey shipwrecks and survey coral depletion in Australia, and they do all kinds of cool things, right? They survey oil pipelines, so there's a lot of work in ROVs. So we think it's pretty cool. And at that time in my marine science program, there was like 8 of us left in our senior class. And the teachers asked us that question: do you guys want to participate in this ROV competition that we heard about? Or do you want to do the normal classwork you've been doing for the past 3 years, where you read something from a book, or perhaps watch a documentary, or do something like that, and then we'll ask you questions to see how much you retained? Or do you want to apply some of that knowledge and build an underwater robot and go and compete in Santa Barbara over the summer, right? So I'm like, yeah, we'll compete, right? That sounds pretty good. We'll get to go to the beach too, right? So we were pretty happy about that. So that's really how we came up with this competition. And at the beginning, there was 8 of us. As the semester went on, people started dropping off of the program. And by the end of the school year, really, there was only 2 of us left that were willing to participate. So Luis and I were the only ones that were left. So we started looking around for other students to help us with the program, because we needed more people in order to be able to participate in the competition, because we needed at least 4 people to man all the systems that our robot had. And that's how Lorenzo and Christian came into the program. They were sophomores at the time, helping a bunch of seniors with their senior project, which the ROV was for us, right? Our total budget for this program, for this project, was $800. Really, that's the money that we could come up by going around the businesses around the area, which already knew us because we were always there asking them for money, right? And I guess we nagged them enough that eventually they would give us money, and we had $800. We also ended up getting a bunch of parts donated to us, and that's how we ended up building Stinky right here. So there was a couple different divisions in the competition. There was essentially 2 divisions, right? One, which had a simple mission task. The tasks were a little easier, and it was geared more towards high schools. And there was a division that had a little more difficult tasks, and it was geared mostly to universities. All right, our teachers gave us the option of picking what we wanted to do with the robot. And they told us, the universities, some of them are MIT, right? I mentioned earlier we came from an area of Phoenix that was pretty poor, right? In my mind, I really didn't think I would go to college, so I really didn't look into what colleges were, which ones were the best colleges or anything like that. I had no idea about anything like that. So when our teachers told us MIT is competing in the university-geared area of the competition, it really didn't mean anything to me, right? I don't know who MIT is. It doesn't really matter. Let's do that competition. Because if we beat one college, if we only beat one, we can say we beat a college, right? If we go to the other level and a high school beats us, then we got beat by another high school, right? This was our first time building on a robot like this. So the odds of us winning, the odds of us just not sinking, were not very good. And that's what we went in that competition, in that harder one. So we go out there, we go to Santa Barbara. The picture there from the book cover was actually taken during that competition, right? So that's me, 2004, so 14 years ago, that's me, right? And the rest of the guys there. So we're always doing silly pictures for the teacher. I never realized that doing that picture would actually be on print, and people would get to see that so many years later, right? So we go to the competition, we compete, and to the surprise, I think no one was more surprised than us that we were actually able to win the competition against universities. So we went out there, we competed, and we won, right? So we're all super excited. We go out, walk the beach, celebrate, and then we get back to Phoenix. Press releases are sent out to anyone, really, everybody, that this school team from an impoverished area of Phoenix, from the desert, built an underwater robot and went to Santa Barbara and won a national competition. But nothing happened. For the longest time, nothing really happened. I don't know, it's kind of probably too bright out, but my high school was not known for building things. My high school was always on TV because there was gang fights, there was people getting beat up, there was threats of all kinds of things, right? Nothing positive ever was coming out of my high school. And when the media would see that, hey, there's something positive, they were not interested because they thought the audience wasn't there. It took about a year before Josh Davis, the same person that wrote the book, he actually wrote an article. He called it La Vida Robot. And about a year later, the article came out. By that point, I had already graduated high school, and I was attending a community college. So when I graduated high school, I didn't have all the credits needed to go to university, so I went to community college for a year. And right about the time the article came out, Arizona State University heard the story. They read the article, and they're like, cool, we want to offer you and Christian, when he graduates, we're going to offer you both a scholarship to come to the Arizona State University, right? So because of that competition, I got a scholarship to go to Arizona State University. And 4 years later, 2009, I actually graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering from there. And I was really happy, right? It was great. So, and probably up until now, you're like, well, that's not that bad of a story, right? You did a robot in high school, you went to a national competition, you won the competition, got a scholarship to go to college, and then you graduated. It seems pretty cool up to now, right? Except that once I graduated college, I couldn't work anywhere, right? And Christian actually didn't even get to graduate from college because his scholarship was taken away 2 years later. It wasn't taken away because of anything he did. It was taken away by a law that Arizona passed that essentially made students like Christian and I out-of-state students, right? And we lost all the in-state tuition. We had to pay extra, and we lost all our scholarships, right? So it wasn't easy. The last 2 years for me, in order to graduate college, I had to apply for all kinds of scholarships. I applied for every single scholarship I found. And then I also had to work and do all that other stuff. So essentially, once school started in August, I didn't have a day off except for Christmas until the summer, right? That's how my life was for the last 2 years of college. And the reason that was the case is because even though I grew up in Phoenix, I was born in Mexico. And I was born in a little town, pretty humble roots. My house was made of adobe. When I was growing up, it leaked when it rained. And in that town, it rained a lot, so it was always leaking. And that's kind of how it was, right? When I was 12 years old, my parents decided that we were going to move to Phoenix. My dad had been living in Phoenix for a while, and essentially it was my mom and I that had to move up to Phoenix with them. I said, no, I don't want to go, all right? In that little town in Mexico where I was born, I knew everybody there. I had all my friends. I had all my family. I did not want to leave my hometown. I wanted to stay there because I was comfortable there. I was going to school. I had a scholarship to go to middle school, which is a thing in Mexico. If your grades are good enough, they give you money so you can buy school materials, right? And I was happy. I was in a good place. But being 12 years old, you really don't have a saying on whether you listen to your mom or not, right? She pretty much told me, you're going, and I went, right? So we went to the border. I don't know if any of you ever have been to the southern border, but there's a lot of pictures, there's a lot of signs across the roads that say warning, there's people running across the road, right? Now that I think about it, if you really think of that picture, that little person on the back, that's me. That's really how I got here, right? We went to the border, we found a hole in the fence, and then we ran. We ran for it, right? Somehow or some way, immigration agents didn't see us or didn't stop to get us, and I eventually made it to a Walmart. And then I got picked from there and taken to Phoenix. And then pretty soon after that, I started middle school. At that point is when I started realizing there was something different about me, right? The first couple days of school, I really didn't understand much. Completely different language. I was pretty lost most of the time, except during math class. That was the only time, that math was the same in Mexico and it was the same here, right? So the numbers were the same thing. And I don't know, I kind of felt good about the math and science. I think that's when the math really started kicking in for me. That's when I really started liking that. But, once I learned English, it took about a year or so, and I started feeling normal again, right? I fit in. I was taking the classes. I was in middle school and doing all that stuff, right? It wasn't until I went to high school that I realized, again, there's something different about me, right? Some of my friends were going to regular English classes. I was placed on ESL classes. Not because I didn't know the language. I was placed in ESL because in the application for high school, they asked me how long have you lived in the US, and we put in there like 2.5 years or something like that. And they said, well, you have to go into ESL just because of the time you've been here, right? I didn't know that those ESL classes were actually holding me back from going to university. Those ESL classes at the time didn't count as an English credit. So when I graduated high school, I wasn't ready for college because of that reason, right? So I had to go to community college instead. In my mind, I didn't realize that the expectations were set by the system themselves that I was not going to go to university just because of my ESL status, right? And in the end, that's why I ended up going to a community college. At the same time, once I graduated, because that was me coming in across the hole in the fence, right, running across the street, because that's how I got into this country. I didn't have a social security card. I didn't have a green card. I didn't have any of that stuff. So even though I had a degree, I really couldn't work anywhere. And that was one of those things that really set me back, right? In high school, once my friends started getting their driver's licenses and once they started getting jobs, it really made me feel different, right? I always felt like I was less than someone because I didn't have a piece of paper, right? And even though I had grades just as good as them, right, and I can understand the material that was being taught, I couldn't have that piece of paper, right? I needed that piece of paper to join the military. I needed that piece of paper to go work, and I really couldn't do any of that stuff, right? And it was hard to deal with that because to this day I always still feel inferior about that, right? And I always just thought that, what if I had that piece of paper, right? How would my life be, right? And I remember hearing some of my friends, complain about schoolwork or complain that they didn't know what they were going to do after high school, but they had that piece of paper. And in my mind, if you had that one piece of paper, if you had the green card, or if you were a citizen, there was really nothing for you to complain about because that was the one thing that was keeping me from doing everything else I wanted to. And I know it really set me back a lot of time, right? It kind of hurt me in a way, right? Because I didn't feel like I was a person. I was always a ESL kid. I was always a kid that was different. And it wasn't different because really of my skin color. I was different because I didn't have a piece of paper. So in my mind, that was it. That was what's causing all that difference. Well, I graduated college, and then I went back. By that point, I was married. And then you see my family here. That's my daughter. And I had a 1-year-old daughter after I graduated. So we sat down, we talked about it, and decided, what are you going to do? What's going to happen? You can't really use your degree here. So the immigration process that we have in place actually requires you to go back to your home country and reapply from there to come back into the country. So we say, well, there's that one path for us to follow in order for me to get a green card, so we're going to follow the one path that we have available, right? If we had other paths, we probably would have followed those too, right? But there was the one path. So I went back to Mexico. I went to Juarez, to the U.S. consulate there, and I knew that my initial petition was going to be denied because I had been in the United States for more than a year after I turned 18. So I went to the consulate. They asked me, have you been in the U.S. for more than a year after you turn 18? I'm like, yes. They're like, well, the law says that you're going to be barred from coming back into the United States for 10 years. But you can apply for a waiver if you can prove that your family will face extreme hardship if you're not around, right? So we're like, well, that should be pretty easy. My wife essentially turning into a single parent with the 1-year-old, it's probably a hardship enough, right? Maybe that we can prove that case, right? So I went back to my hometown for 2 months. And then we applied for that waiver. So we put in all kinds of letters from everybody. My wife's statement saying that, it was extremely hard for her to be separated from me. And at that time, the border violence in Mexico was huge, right? So she really couldn't go visit me as much. So we applied. I go in there, and there's this one person, right, that has essentially the power to tell you whether you're going to get a green card or not. So we made the application for the waiver. A couple of days later, we get the answer in the mail saying, nope, it's still not good enough. You're still denied. And it's crazy to believe that one person in the U.S. consulate had the power to decide where your life went, right? To this day, I don't know why they denied it, but we still had to make the best of it. And by that point, I already had a degree, so I went and started working in a parts factory in Mexico. A couple months later, Senator Dick Durbin was trying to pass a piece of legislation called the DREAM Act. Essentially, the DREAM Act states that if you're a child that came into the United States without inspection, and you were under a certain age, right? So if you were, I think, under 16 years old when you came, then you can eventually apply for a green card, right? That's what the piece of legislation was saying, right? You actually had to have no criminal background, and you have to either go to college or join the military afterwards. And he was trying to propose that legislation, and he was looking for stories to tell in order to support his case. So he came upon my story. He thought it was a good story to tell, and he told my story in front of Congress. And then a couple of weeks after he told that story, I got another piece of mail in Mexico saying that my green card had been approved. So again, another person had the ability to change where my life went just by telling my story in front of Congress, right? And I still have a hard time coming up to terms how my case was, I got lucky enough to have my story be told in front of Congress, where there's still a lot of people out there that have very similar stories, but they haven't got the chance to be told, and they're still out there waiting their chance to come back. So he told my story. I got my green card. I came back into the United States. I started, trying to live the American dream, right? Have a college degree. What's next? Go get a good job and start getting paid, right? So I started applying everywhere. I went and applied in medical, logistics, Intel, Boeing. I applied everywhere I could think of. And I started getting interviews. At around the same time, I started feeling back into that one piece of paper I always needed. I have it now, right? So I went and grabbed the driver's license, right? That was the coolest thing ever for me, being 24 and going out there and getting a driver's license. It was awesome. And then I realized, wait, if I can get a driver's license now, I can get a job now. I wonder if I can still join the military now, right? I wanted to join the military so bad when I was in high school. That's really what I wanted to do. Engineering and STEM came from the marine science class because that was something that kept me entertained, that kept me busy, that gave me a purpose when I was in high school because I couldn't join the military. But now that I had this little piece of paper, I could go and join the military, and then they clicked, right? I don't want to, it'd be nice to make all that money, right, from an engineering degree, but I really want to serve the military. So I came back from Mexico in August of 2010, and February 1st, 2011, I actually shipped over to basic training. And I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and it was 8 degrees and cold, and it was awesome. I had a lot of good training out there, and I joined the Army February 1st, 2011. And in the middle of July of 2011, I actually got to go to airborne school, and I got to jump out of aircraft and put on a parachute and do all kinds of cool stuff. And let me see if I can put it back on. All right. And I think that was one of those times where I always felt that I was different because I didn't have a piece of paper. And in the Army, they always told us, I don't care if you're from a Mexican descent, if you're from African-American descent, in the end, everybody's green, right? And I think it was one of those places where I really felt like I clicked, right? Because we were all the same color, no matter where you came from. And I always felt that this great sense of belonging when I was in active duty. At some points, I always felt that growing up, I always felt less, right? And I looked for those kind of feelings when I was in the military as well, right? I had one buddy, a great buddy of mine nowadays, that he used to really dislike me when I was in the military, when we first got together. When I first got stationed in Anchorage, Alaska, and Fort Richardson, he hated me. And I always thought that he hated me because he was being racist, right? He didn't like my accent. He always made fun of me for something, right? And years later, we were, talking about it. I'm like, why did you hate me so much when I first came on, right? And in my mind, it was going to be because he was going to say that he didn't like me because I was Hispanic. He's like, no, I hated you because you were a know-it-all, and you never really let me talk or say anything else, right? So growing up, I always had this feeling of being less and looking for that disrespect or that racism to affect me. And when I joined the military, that kind of went away, right? And all those excuses, I was still looking for it. And I really thought that I had found someone that was racist in the military. And I'm sure, I can't say that there's no racist people around, right? But I didn't get to experience any of that stuff. And when he gave me that explanation as to why he was always hating me, it kind of clicked, right? Sometimes I had the own presumptions. And maybe it was my own self that was looking for that when it really wasn't there. Another thing that I learned when I was in the military is that, you know, a couple times when we were in Afghanistan, we would get into firefights with the Taliban. And not once did I feel that the Taliban were particularly trying to shoot me more because I was from Mexico, right? It was all the same. And as much as that sucks, it was a great sense of belonging, right? I remember, though, that feeling. So I went, and I remember the feeling after the first firefight, right? And we were just there chit-chatting, you know, kind of burning off the adrenaline that happens afterwards. And I just got sat down, and it kind of hit me, right? I've earned the right to be called an American after that one firefight, right? I had put my life on the line, and I earned it. And I don't think anybody should have to go to that to feel that they belong here. So I went to Afghanistan. I did all that. I had a bunch of great buddies that I made some lifelong friendships, and it was a great time, right? It definitely steered me in the right direction. It helped me fit like I belonged, right? It gave me this great sense of purpose, and I don't know, it turned me into Major Glenn Goins when I was in high school. He always, you know, our high school motto for ROTC was to make students be better American citizens. And he understood that not all of us were American citizens, so they changed the motto to help people become better citizens, right? And I think that the military definitely helped me out in that sense, right? It definitely gave me that great sense of belonging. It gave me that sense of purpose, and it just brought me overall, gave me a different perspective on the things that we have, right? Made me appreciate every single thing that we have even more. Because even though when I went to high school where people qualify for free lunch, right, where we were all pretty poor. Thinking about that, thinking back of the things that I had in high school, right, when I went back to Mexico, I saw the things that kids had in Mexico. And oh my God, being poor in the US is so much better than being poor out there. You still had all kinds of cool things that you didn't have out there. Like I had a color TV. In my house where I was born, I didn't have electricity until I was like 6, right? So even though it gave me a great perspective that even though I thought I had it bad when I was in high school, that I lived in a bad neighborhood, it was still a lot better than the other option had I remained in Mexico, right? There's a lot of things that we take for granted in this country every day that most of us don't realize how good we have it until we have that perspective that I have, right? And it's always a great feeling to realize that you are part of something bigger than you, and you're part of a country where events like today are possible, where you can have that opportunity to talk, to share your stories, and to communicate with people in a deeper level. So I went to the military. I served for 3.5 years active duty. I'm still in the Army Reserves. I still get to do all that cool stuff once a month, which is enough Army for me. So 2 days a month is pretty good, right? Nowadays, I work for BNSF Railways. I'm a business analyst. Now I am actually using the degree that I earned, right? And even though I got my degree in mechanical engineering, I really never worked as a mechanical engineer, right? So it's something that I always tell students, right? If you're not really sure what you want to study because you're afraid that you're going to be doing that the rest of your life, just get a degree in STEM, because companies are going to hire you, and then they're going to teach you what it really is that you have to do. So don't ever think that just the thing that you're studying for is the one thing you're going to be doing afterwards, because I am proof that that's not the case, right? So I worked in production lines. I did the Army. I worked in repair facilities, and now I work as a business analyst. At some point, I wrote some Java code as well, right? So I learned all kinds of different things in industry that have kind of rounded me off as well, right? One of the things that I always try to do is go out there and share the story, right? You know, tell the kids that I'm just a normal kid that came from a really poor town in Mexico, that grew up on the poor streets of Phoenix, and I was able to go to college. I really try to share the story for kids to be able to relate to me, because I'm just a normal person, right? And if I was able to go through some adversity and find the right support system to be able to help me make it through college, then I want to help them do the same thing, right? I want to be able to help them believe in themselves. The day that we won the robotics competition, I started believing that there was something else I could provide. I started believing in myself, and once you light up that spark, that you believe that you are someone, that you can provide something positive, then you can just go for it, right? And you'll find a way. And that's really what I try to do. So one of the pictures here is one of the robotics, actually two of the robotics programs that I help with in high school. There's a bunch of, the area of BNSF where I work now, the area around BNSF is the same kind of socioeconomic status as the area where I grew up on. And I see myself in the kids, right? And I always go and talk to them, and I try to get them to do robotics, to do something positive for themselves so that they can go to college, they can continue their education and believe it, that there's an option that they can potentially have one day. And then I also have one of the things that people take for granted, and it really angers me when people actually have the right to vote and then they don't go do it, right? Because if there's one of those things that you can affect change with, there's one of the things that that piece of paper gives you that you don't even have to do anything for. I had to go through a lot of trouble just to get that piece of paper, right? So I've always make it a point to go vote, right? And I realized that I wasn't going to be in my district when I came out here. So I actually went and voted early. So that's a picture of my daughter and I gone out there to the polling place because I went out there and I voted, right? I made sure that I made that commitment before I came here. And I know you've been told a couple times today to go vote, so you'll hear it once again. Go vote. And I think that's really where I want to share the story, right? Another cool thing about it is we were 4 high school kids from a pretty rough neighborhood that ended up winning a competition, right? And this is something for you to think about. Had it not been that we were from a broke neighborhood and that we were undocumented, you think the story would have gotten the same level of attention eventually, right? It's another thing that I don't know the answer to that, but I do question that sometimes, right? And maybe something for you to think about as you go on with the rest of the day, and just think about what would have happened if we were just, an average American kid that went out there and won the competition. Where would you think, we would have ended up? As a point of reference, the guys from MIT, a couple years ago we met the guys from MIT, and one of them was designing the headphones for Apple, right? So if you ever bought an iPhone and got those headphones, that guy designed them, right? Another guy was in Antarctica doing research, and another one was in an ocean research lab, right? I went into the Army. Christian is still struggling to complete college. I think that the fact that he had so many obstacles definitely affected how he sees himself, and he's had a hard time fitting in and just going to school. Lorenzo and Luis have a catering business, and they struggle sometimes. They had a hard time without the documents, right? What would have happened if all 4 of us were just the average person in the U.S.? Where would we be? Would I be here, or would I not be here, right? Where would the other guys be, right? And I think that there's a lot of kids that have the potential. They have the potential to be a lot more, to be more contributing members to society, to create great things if we just give them that opportunity, right? I think that for the longest time, the way the politics are going on nowadays, people are seeing kid immigrants as a burden in the system, and I think we should see them as an opportunity for us to mold them into whatever it is we expect from them, right? If we set the expectation low, then that's what we're going to get. But the fact that we have a lot of immigrant kids that have a different perspective and they can contribute something is an opportunity. And I think that we should all see that, and hopefully we can open the eyes of other people to feel the same way. And with that, thank you. And I think we're going to open it up for questions. If you guys have some questions, then we have a couple minutes.
Can you hear me? If anybody has a question, just put your hand up, and I will bring you the microphone for the folks that are participating online.
Yeah, I was wondering if you ever wished that your parents had waited to cross legally, so that you could have maybe avoided all the hardships that you faced. And then I was wondering if you had any haste towards them currently, or if you if that was something you ever struggled with growing up.
Can you repeat the second part of the question?
Yeah, did you ever grow up with like negative feelings towards your parents due to the fact that they brought you over illegally rather than legally?
So look, the first part of the question, do I wish that my parents would have waited longer? So the matter of fact is that there's no legal way for my parents to ever come to the country. So I think that there's something that that needs to be said out there. And people often do say that, right? Maybe you should go back and come in the right way. For a lot of people like my parents that were not educated, the immigration system is not going to let you come back into the country. It's not going to let you come in. There's no visas available for things like that. So if they would have waited, they would still be waiting. And the second part is, do I have negative feelings for my parents for making that decision and dragging me across the border? And I often sit, right, and I ask myself that same question. If I was my parents, what would I do? And I think I would make the same choice they made. Because I think if I look back in history, people have been making that pilgrimage to the United States for generations. That's how this country was made. People have been coming here for opportunity forever. And as long as we keep the country as great as we kept it, people will continue to do that. Right? This is a great country. And yeah, there's difficulties. There's things that we can change. There's things that we need to fix. But if you go and look around and get a different perspective, then you really realize how good we have it here. And as long as that's the case, people are going to continue to come. So I really can't have any bad feelings towards my parents. It was a hard decision, right? But they made that decision and they went with it. And I really can't be angry at them for that. I don't even know how they did it, how they made that decision, but it wasn't easy, I know that. And I just can't be angry to them for that.
Okay, we've got another question in the back here.
Hi, thanks so much for being here today and sharing your story. I'm wondering how, what I can do as a person who was born here in the United States and as a white person, and how I can help people have awesome lives here in the United States and help people who maybe have to make the choice to come here even if they don't have a legal way to get here. What can I do?
So I think that she asked, what can I do, right? And that's one of the things that you can do, right? You can always go vote, right? Vote for someone that has kind of like the same views as you do, right? I'm not really saying who in particular, but just go out there and let your mind be known, right? I think that if we do that enough, we can, guide this country in whatever path we want to guide it in. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is, I think oftentimes when I was growing up and people heard me speak with an accent, they would always talk down to me a little more afterwards, right? Because they didn't think maybe that I was perhaps smart enough to comprehend what they were telling me. But I think if you just see when you hear someone with an accent, realize that they have an accent because they speak another language already, right? They are capable of understanding complex ideas, right? So I think just have an open mind, right? Just have an open mind and see people for who they really are, not for the color of their skin or their accent. And once you really make that connection to the person, then you realize that immigration is just people coming in, right, for a variety of reasons, but they all have something to provide.
All right, another one from the back here.
Thank you. We're both in the military, and this is a huge perspective of our characters. And I agree, absolutely. No one should have to get shot at, shoot at people, or in the case with the migrants who are marching through Mexico, walk thousands and thousands of miles to just have a life, to get that piece of paper and feel like you're a part of something. I don't really have a question, but today you've changed my mind about so many things of the military that I thought were real. And I joined thinking that I was gonna defend freedom. But in a sense, I gave myself an opportunity to do something that I never would have been able to do. People don't need to go shoot at people to get college degrees. People don't need to oppress other countries to get college degrees or get a piece of paper for freedom. And I think one of the most important things you taught me today is that we have to question the things that we do sometimes to know if we're moving forward properly, if we're going in the right direction. And I just thank you. Thank you so much, Oscar. That was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Any other questions?
Chish, Achtuasaguin Kachonigi, Tachik Ea Ishkatnigi, Gulchisho Itutlaani Kaitulitzini. I just want to thank you in our language and let you know that I appreciate hearing your story and you sharing your kindness and your courage. We have, there was a student here who was in a class that was called something like cross-cultural communication. And the textbook that they had said, America's becoming more diverse, and this is referred to as the Browning of America. And so she spoke back to the classroom and to the teacher and said, yeah, I kind of have a problem with this assumption that there's a white America and it's getting, this Browning of America is the wrong term. And I don't feel like she was allowed to sort of engage in that conversation. They really defended the textbook. But what I was wondering is if you have any thoughts on the way sometimes this talk about a caravan is being portrayed, because I think they're really playing on these fears that whiteness is somehow under attack and is this sort of thing that's going to be lost, because it's not only some really bad people, but it's also like, oh, and there's Middle Eastern people there too, right? So there's just using this, I feel like they're using this thing like, here are these brown peoples coming to invade. And in particular, like this is what happens, I think, at the southern border, where you also have indigenous peoples who now have, we have this here with, this is Tlingit country, and you go over there, and it's Canada now, but that was Tlingit Ani then, and it still is now. So I was just wondering what your thoughts might be.
So I think definitely that's been politicized, right? I think that, especially this time around, right, with the election being here, right? I think that caravan's been happening for a long time, right? You only start hearing about it recently since certain political changes happened, right? And I think that is definitely just trying to play on those fears, right? And the fears of change. I think people always fear change, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But I think that if you really get to know the reason why people are coming here, right? I think it's like it's a compliment to this country. The fact that people do come here is because we're doing well, right? The fact that they're still doing it, right? And it's having been one of those kids that came right into this country, I can only feel for what they're going through at this time when they're walking thousands of miles just to come here, right? In the search for the hope, right? And I don't think that having more immigrants here is necessarily losing Americans' identity, right? Because it is not about the color, right? We're all in this boat together. And I think that it is just playing politics of fear. And I think it's a sad thing that we gotten to the point where we have to do that in order to get people to go vote or to vote for a certain thing. And, it's just up to each one of us to, decide where it is that we want to go. And if we're going to let that affect our minds or not, if we're going to let that fear get in, or if we're going to just let the fear grow. Because in the end, thousands of immigrants come here all the time. And it's going to continue to be the case, right? But it is how the immigrants are treated, where we're going to alienate the immigrants that come in, or we're going to include them as part of the country, and so we can move forward.
Okay.
Thanks for coming to speak to my class yesterday, too. I was wondering if you could speak to challenges in education and how you experienced as a young person when teachers had high expectations of you, and what kinds of expectations they had of you as an ESL student, those sorts of things.
All right, so I think that the biggest challenge for me during my education was the fact that when I was an ESL student, right, I was an ESL student. I just wanted to be a normal kid, right? I just wanted to be a student, right? I didn't want to have a label. I didn't want to, in ESL classes, I was, every kid wants to be special in a way. But I think that being an ESL kid, I was special because I was less. And I didn't like that feeling, right? So I think that was a huge hurdle to realize that I couldn't read a Harry Potter book because I was ESL and I couldn't read a Harry Potter book, right? It's kind of one of those things where I think that was just the self-worth that I had because I came as an immigrant. It kind of affected me, the fact that I was labeled as someone that couldn't perhaps understand that kind of book, right? And I think that that's kind of the expectations. Not necessarily, I think that people have expectations of you, right? But the moment those expectations, that you have your own expectations of yourself and they are that low, I think that's when you have the problem, right? People are going to meet you, they're going to have their own expectations, so they're going to think you're going to do whatever it is that they think you can do, right? But if you believe in that, then that's when you start having the issues, right? That's, for me, I believe that I didn't think I could go to college, right? My expectations were I could graduate to high school, and that's what I was headed. That's what I did, right? It wasn't until my high school teachers from the robotics program really started setting those expectations that, yeah, you can go to college, that I started believing I could do that, right? So I think that, you know, I can't really change what people expect of anyone else, right? But if you can control your expectations and believe yourself a little more, right? You have a little more self-worth, then you can just go and go wherever it is you want to go.
Yeah, my name is Brandon Johnson. I'm just trying to, so many things to think about and so many things to like relate to your story. Like, how do I want to present myself as an indigenous person? Like, I'm Tlingit, and that's amazing. But what really spoke out to me right now is the story of you not feeling up to that piece of paper, and I feel that way a lot. My first college class was in jail, so like that was my first perspective of being in a classroom, was in jail when I was 28 years old. Never been in trouble a day in my life before that. It was one moment that I got into a fight, and that was the day I became a felon. So like, now that I've reached that bottom and then I'm coming up out of that, I find myself fighting for other felons that don't have a voice, because we always get pushed under the rug. We're always that, oh, that's that person who broke the law, and they're always going to be the same. They're going to be the same. They. It's always their favorite word, they. Do you find yourself seeking out immigration stories and try to help people with those immigration stories? Do you find yourself for that calling to like, this is what I want to do? Like, this is maybe the story is being put on a pedestal where I feel obligated, a moral obligation to tell that story, to, like, I understand Jonas sought you out. For me, I put myself out there. I got my coin from JPD. I successfully completed my probation, got off early. Now I'm halfway to my bachelor's degree. So these things, these fighting of the they, I fight that every day. I go to school with kids half my age that don't have to deal with the stuff that I have to deal with. Father of two, my wife being pregnant, having to read all night long, and then try to communicate with people and then be labeled. As soon as and I'm not afraid to say that I'm a felon, because I want to be that voice for those people, for the ones that get forgotten, the ones that have said, you know what, do I even have the right to vote? Yes. Yes, you do. I voted today, and yes, I am a felon. So do you find that? Do you like I need to, like, I know you have a job and you have your family, but there's always, this is something that's across the board. Like, do you seek that out?
So I do, and that's I think the whole story, right, when it first came out, Josh Davis told us, right, I want to write this article, but it's really not going to be that cool of an article unless I say that you guys are undocumented, right? Unless I acknowledge the fact that you guys are here without documents. Because that really is going to bring the discussion. That really is going to make people aware that, hey, there's these people here that you're not even aware of, that really are not even in the books, right? That they can provide something. That these kids are here that can, potentially help out, right? And I think we knew that potentially there was going to be repercussions at that point, right? That perhaps, they were going to say this for these 4 undocumented kids that go to Carl Hayden High School, is INS going to come and get us, right? And from the get-go, we decided, hey, if we can help someone out by telling that story, then we're going to do it. And that's really how the story came out, right? To this day, so yes, I do events like this where people invite me to go. But locally, I do seek out those things, right? The fact that I help out with those robotics clubs is not because someone asked me to go. I go and look for opportunities. I go and look at robotics clubs. I go find kids. I go and talk to all the high schools I could think of in the area, right, to try and tell the story, to try and resonate, right? Because my whole goal is to be able to look at a kid in the eyes and just tell them, hey, you can do whatever you want to do when you grow up, right? You can be whatever you want to be. And it shouldn't be limited because of the background where they come from, and it shouldn't be limited because whether they're going to have the money or not, or because they have a paper or not, right? And I still want to do that. I still try to do that. I try to do it as much as I can. And, the robotics club is really where I'm focusing on right now. So I do seek that out, right? Maybe not as actively as potentially you do, or maybe as I should, right? But that is something that I am bound to do for the rest of my life while I have this story. Right? If this story can, empower someone or inspire someone to go and continue their education, right? I'm going to continue to do so, and I'm going to continue to talk about it wherever it is that I can. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We're all out of time for more questions. I wish we had more time. Oscar will be available to sign books and chat for a little bit back here at the Hearthside table, but I know other people have sessions to get to. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Maybe one more round of applause for Oscar.